Yeah, all right. So you can see I'm on a fucking massive kick, man. I'm on a big ass fucking YouTube or whatever, content creation kick. And and these are just things that I enjoy talking about, and also just things that I think are important, And but whatever. So I've been talking about like buzz and hype as a way to differentiate like what's fake from what's kind of more potentially is more real than more fake. Um, you know, and because that's what it's all about. Fake versus real. What's real? What's fake? And so anyways. Yeah, like I wanted to mention some things too, which is I've already mentioned this a lot, but so in a way it's kind of house cleaning. My job is and the work I've been involved in the last 6 years is seasonal, and it'll pick up out of nowhere and just be like 7 days a week, 15 hours a day for 2 months or whatever, like these strange things. And then it'll go from that to abruptly stop. And then I've got like a month off or whatever. And so when I have this time off, I'll just dump videos. And a lot of it is because I'm just kind of I'm just kind of addicted to creativity. Like I like to create, and like talking about being in bands and stuff. I've always been just kind of a creator. I love it's kind of a healthy thing, Instead of if I've got all this downtime and I've got nothing to do, I can create something, and using video platforms has been my creative outlet for the last 6 years. Like before that, I was constantly playing in bands all the time, writing music, playing shows. At one point I was in 3 different bands at the same time, and just so I've always just kind of been this way. But one reason I wanted to point it out is because I've had people where they accuse me of being an agent, or and I think a lot of it is because I'll just dump a lot of videos and stuff, and or whatever, or just different reasons, which is hilarious because I know I'm not an agent, but I guess other people are gonna whatever make come up with all kinds of assumptions about what I'm doing and this and that. So whatever. But anyways, just to kind of give people a heads up, I dump a lot of videos in a short period of time, and it's only because I'm in between. Like there's downtime at my job, and so when I have downtime, I'll create. And and it kind of like segues into like Joe Rogan. Think of it like a Joe Rogan podcast. I mean, I don't watch Joe Rogan at all, but I was interested in watching the Trump thing. And I watched I watched the whole 3 hours and 13, or I think it was just 3 hours, but and I watched the whole thing, and Joe Rogan is no more special than you or me or anyone else. I mean, it's like whatever. And nobody even thinks twice about, oh yeah, Joe Rogan put out 3 hours. Well, I put out like an hour and a half yesterday, and it's because I have downtime, and their discussion can be important. There are important things to discuss, and just because Joe Rogan is discussing something doesn't make it important at all. Like, whatever. I mean, so I don't care. I just do what I want. I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me. You know, if a person gets annoyed because I'm not that someone is or nothing anything, but you know, it's totally it's definitely a you know, it's definitely something that can happen where a person's like, well, you know, they don't want to watch my videos because I'm pumping out 4 or 5 20-minute videos a day, and it's like, well, whatever. I mean, go watch Joe Rogan's 3-hour podcast. Then I don't care. Joe Rogan is like the biggest fucking thing going on the internet, and he's putting out 3 hours a day. I don't know why an hour of my shit would be like a big like, oh my god, how dare this guy, you know, whatever. And also, you look at what, like, so I watched the whole. You look at these programs like Joe Rogan and stuff. I mean, a lot of it is a joke. Whatever the case, it's just a joke. You know, that's the only reason I watched Trump is because it's like different than what Joe Rogan normally does. You know, he's been all afraid, like afraid to have Trump on his show. Why? Because it'll tank his ratings. Well, that just tells you what kind of content you're watching. If someone is all concerned about their ratings and their career as a podcaster, well, then that, you know, that's what dictates their content is ratings. Whereas what I'm doing isn't that at all. Like, I don't give a fuck whether a person watches it or not. Like, who fucking cares? And so that's the only reason I watched that one is because you know, it's like, wow, Joe Rogan is is going outside of the box here on this one. I wonder what this is about, you know. And anyways, and so yeah, and so I watched 3 hours, the whole 3 hours, and and so this is like an interesting point that I observed when watching this is that the most intriguing part of the whole 3 hour thing was Joe Rogan started talking about homelessness as he's engaging in this conversation with Trump. And I've seen clips of Joe Rogan doing this before where he talks about homelessness. Well, first off, right off the bat, like, what does he know about homelessness? Nothing. So it's like, okay, this guy that doesn't know anything about homelessness wants to talk about homelessness. Well, that piques my curiosity. Like, well, what kind of input would he have on something he doesn't know anything about? That would be like me talking about UFC fighting. Like, I'm just going to go on and just start talking about UFC fighting. Well, Joe Rogan would be like, well, who is this guy talking about UFC fighting? He don't even know nothing about it. Exactly my point. So I get interested when I hear people talk about something that I have the equivalent of like a PhD in, and somebody like Joe Rogan is going to talk like they know anything about it at all. And he does it. He'll do it from time to time. And those clips I'm always like curious, like, what is this guy going to say? What does Joe Rogan say every single time he talks about homelessness? He says the exact same thing that mainstream media does, which is what everyone else does. You take any BitChute channel, you pick a BitChute channel. Any of the popular and trendy ones, they never talk about homelessness. And when they do, they say the same thing that Joe Rogan does. And who says the same thing that mainstream media does? Oh, there's just poop everywhere. You know, these people, they're all the scum of the earth cockroaches walking all over the place. It's like, you know, I mean, it'd be one thing if Joe Rogan knew what he was talking about. You know? I'm telling you, I would take Joe Rogan to fucking school on that shit. If Joe Rogan had me on his podcast and all we did was talk about homelessness, I would dismantle his whole fucked up paradigm of what he thinks he knows about homelessness. He doesn't know anything about it. It's always the same, well, they're all just pooping in the streets everywhere and blah, blah. Like, he don't know anything about it. Dude, I've got over 70,000 hours of field research, field study, field experience, training, everything. Like, I know that backwards and forwards, upside down, inside out, right side up, every which dude, I would take that motherfucker to school all day long. Put me on the Joe Rogan podcast for 3 hours engaging Joe Rogan on the subject of homelessness. I would take that motherfucker to school. By the time I was done with him, he would never have the same. He would always be haunted by mine and his 3-hour discussion. He would never be the same. But you'll never get that. You'll never get anybody talking about homelessness on anything. But it's funny how they always want to, whenever it does come up, they always talk like they're the expert on it. Well, they can never be put in check because they're never going to have anybody that knows the ins and outs of homelessness on their show. Because they're never going to talk about anything homeless unless it's convenient for them. And it's always going to be the same thing that mainstream media says. Oh, they're all just a bunch of lazy, mentally ill, drug addicted, criminal, vagrant degenerates who failed to take personal responsibility. It's all the same. It's all a lie, dude. And most people like that saying where it's like you it's easy to fool people, but it's but like to convince someone that they've been fooled. And homelessness, like everybody's been fooled. Nobody knows the truth on homelessness, and so, but they'll whenever it's convenient for whatever they're going to say, they bring it up and they talk like they know anything. They don't know anything about it at all, and Joe Rogan's all of a sudden the expert on homelessness. And if you think that what I'm talking about is irrelevant and doesn't apply, look at Hurricane Helene. All those displaced people from Hurricane Helene, all of a sudden, all these people are experts on displacement and displaced people. Well, that's what the over 1 million homeless people in this country are. That's what displacement means, homeless. So all of a sudden, these people that don't know anything about the subject at all, when Hurricane Helene happens and it displaces 2,000 people, all of a sudden, all these shills come out and they're all of a sudden the experts on displaced people. Meanwhile, in the last 20 years, you've had over 1 million displaced homeless people, and they never talk about it. But I thought displacement is all important all of a sudden because of Hurricane Helene. You see, none of this makes any sense. These people are inconsistent. There is a massive inconsistency in their narrative. They're not talking about the 1 million displaced homeless people in this country, the homeless youth of which comprise the vast majority of all sex-trafficked children, but they never talk about that. But then they love to talk about sex trafficking. They never talk about the 1 million displaced homeless citizens in this country. But as soon as Hurricane Helene comes and displaces 2,000 people, boy, they're on top of it, and they're all of a sudden the expert on homelessness. And this is what I'm saying. And like I said, any of these guys, if I sat down with any of these guys, I'd just take them to fucking school. I'd just embarrass them. Like, they don't know what they're talking about when they're talking about displaced people. They don't know what they're even sex trafficking. They don't even know what they're talking about when they're talking about child sex trafficking. They don't know anything about what they're talking about, but they're the fucking expert on it. And, this is fucking, Gandhi was right when he said you can measure a society by how it treats its poor. Well, the society of truthers, Joe Rogan kind of fits into this whole truther thing and stuff, and like he's gonna have real discussions about stuff. Oh yeah, he's so, you can measure the truth community by how the truth community treats the subject of homelessness and poverty and displacement. And as much as a person, your average person might want to dismiss this as, oh, that's just whatever. No, if you want to add a tool to effectively discerning fake truthers and bullshit from real reality, the subject of poverty is one of the most accurate tools to measure bullshitters from somebody who's real. Because if somebody who's real wants to talk about the 2,000 displaced victims of Hurricane Helene, well, that's a perfect segue into talking about the over 1 million displaced homeless U.S. citizens. And so, if they're true and real, they will segue from talking about Hurricane Helene into the over 1 million displaced U.S. homeless citizens. They will. They'll segue right into it without any fear of anything, because they're not about ratings and views and likes and clickbait and subscribers. They're just doing a genuine organic channel. They're not just hyping up their channel for views. They're genuinely having discussions about real things. And Hurricane Helene, the 2,000 displaced people in Hurricane Helene, is a perfect segue to talk about, the over 1 million displaced homeless citizens in this country, including homeless youth, who comprise the vast majority of all sex trafficked children in the big, hot, sexy topic of child sex trafficking. Everybody loves to talk about sex and so even sex trafficking, child sex trafficking is a segue into a smooth segue into talking about the over 1 million displaced homeless citizens in this country, but they never touch it. That's because they're fucking hyped up fake shills. Otherwise they would go right into talking about that. And so yeah, Gandhi was right. You can measure a society by how it treats its poor. Just like these white nationalists, so-called far-right white nationalists. Well, far-right white nationalism is a perfect segue into talking about all the poor Appalachian whites who have been displaced in Appalachia for over a century. But isn't that odd how it's conspicuously absent from the far-right white nationalist discussion? It's just as odd as the conspicuous absence of talking about the 1 million displaced homeless people in this country when talking about the 2,000 displaced people from Hurricane Helene. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. When they're intentionally not talking about something that is directly related and can easily be a segue into it, and they're just intentionally avoiding talking about it, well, that's absence of evidence, which is evidence that they're just a shill. They're a lying, fucking clickbaity, grifting shill, and that's it. So yes, you can measure a society by how it treats the subject of poverty. You totally can. You can measure the truth community by how it treats the subject of poverty. They only talk about it when Hurricane Helene displaces 2,000 people. Meanwhile, for the last 5 decades, you've had 1 million people, homeless, displaced people, and that nobody ever talks about. This is all evidence. If you're investigating and you're trying to connect dots and do pattern recognition, this is a massively glaring pattern that all these so-called pattern recognition people are just coincidentally is totally off their radar. They're just not noticing this. But they're the experts on pattern recognition. How could they not notice this? Like that doesn't make any sense. And if something doesn't make sense, well, it's not true. And if it's not true, and we're talking about the truth community, these are truthers in the truth community. You might be like, well, yeah, everybody knows that, there's a bunch of fake truthers. Well, they're all fake. Anyone that's not talking about the over 1 million displaced homeless U.S. citizens in this country, if they're not talking about it, then they're a fake. Especially if they're going to talk about displaced hurricane victims and then not even notice the pattern and the segue of that into they don't even talk about it. Well, it's obvious they're fake, and they're all fake. Who is which truther? Name that truther. Let's play the game. Name that truther. Name that truther that's talking about the 1 million displaced homeless fucking U.S. citizens when they're talking about Hurricane Helene and the displaced victims of Hurricane Helene. Name that truther. Yeah, that's right. That truther doesn't exist. Huh. Weird. So no, it isn't like, yeah, everybody knows there's a bunch of fake truthers in the truth. No, it's like they're all fake. They're all fake. Name that truther. Name that truther that's talking about. Or what about the truther that's going on and on about sex trafficking that just conveniently doesn't supposedly hasn't noticed that the bulk of all sex trafficked children are homeless youth? The homeless youth are the massive bulk of all sex trafficked children. Just not even mentioned. Well, and that's just by coincidence. There is no evidence. That isn't evidence of anything. That isn't make it evident that they're just a fucking lying shit. Name that truther that's talking about how how homeless youth is tied to child sex trafficking. Name that truther. Again, that's right. It doesn't exist. That's because they're all fakes. They're all fucking frauds. And eventually this is going to become so exposed that all these fake frauds are going to have to talk about homelessness, because they're going to be seen as fakes and frauds. And so then all these people that know nothing about homelessness are going to be the experts on homelessness. Just like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, and this is the interesting thing about that. Joe Rogan started trying to bait Trump to talk about homelessness and to parrot the same old lines that everyone else does, that they're all just lazy, mentally ill. We really need to do something. We really need to, all these lazy, drug addict, homeless people pooping everywhere. And Trump didn't take the bait at all. Joe Rogan was like, he was expecting Trump would just start talking, yeah, these lazy, street shitters, they're all just drug addicts and mentally ill, crazy people, and we really need to clean up this. Joe Rogan, he was just expecting Trump would just jump right on that, right on board, like, oh yeah, Trump didn't even flinch, dude. He didn't even flinch. He just was like, yeah, and went right into talking about how farmers are all getting fucked over. All these poor farmers that are getting fucked over. I mean, he didn't go into homelessness like I would if Joe Rogan did that to me, but at least he didn't take the bait. He's not a brainwashed fucking automaton NPC like, yeah, they're all just lazy, mentally ill, drug addicted, criminal, vagrant, degenerate, street shitters who failed to take person. He didn't even nibble on that. And by talking about all these poor farmers getting fucked over was basically like putting it back on Joe Rogan. Like, maybe Joe Rogan ought to think about what he's talking about instead of being just another dumb fuck NPC piece of shit. What does Joe Rogan know about homelessness anyway? What does he even know? If he wants to have that discussion, why not get somebody that actually knows about it? You know why? Because they'd fucking push his shit in. He'd get his shit pushed in. He'd be exposed as he don't even know what the fuck he's talking about when he's talking. And I'm telling you, one of these days, all this is gonna start surfacing. And when it does, that's the red flag. That means shit is about to really hit the fan, like really fast. And you better fucking be on your toes. When that starts trending, you better be on your toes, because it's going to be a bunch of people that don't know anything about what they're talking about. They're going to be pretending like they're experts on something they know nothing about. And it's going to be the worst. That is going to be the worst red flag you'll ever see, because that means the pods are coming. They're about to roll out the pods and all this shit. I'm telling you, man. So anyways, yeah, so I wanted to talk about everything I'm talking about. I don't know how effective I was at it, but it's really important. This is like really important shit. And everybody just keeps kicking the over 1 million displaced homeless Americans down the road. They just don't want to talk about it. But the more they talk about sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, and the more they talk about displaced people from hurricanes, the more it's going to be like they're painting themselves into a corner, because eventually it's going to be like, well, what do you know about displaced people? You want to keep talking about child sex trafficking? Well, were you aware of the homeless youth phenomena, and that homeless youth are the ones that that's where they're getting all these how they're trafficking all these sex trafficked children, is through this homeless fucking grinder, where they're just grinding everybody into homelessness, and then telling everybody, oh, those are just the lazy people, just ignore them. This is all and once this starts coming out, that is going to be the end, the beginning of the end. That is going to be like Klaus Schwab and all the poverty pods and the poverty bug sandwiches and the poverty collapse and the poverty, oh, the world economy has collapsed, so everybody's move into your pods and eat your bug sandwiches. It's all coming. When they start when this starts getting exposed, they're not going to risk the truth about all of this shit coming out. And again, think about it. Think about the Gandhi quote. You can measure a society by how it treats its poor.